My first day as a ranger in the Everglades, they didn't give me a tour. They gave me a laminated sheet that smelled like mildew and bug spray, the corners rounded from too many pockets and too much sweat. Ranger Morales slid it across the counter with two fingers like a dealer giving me a losing hand. Memorize these before sundown, he said. You forget one, you don't get a second chance. I thought rules about sunscreen and snakes and don't feed gators. I thought maybe it was a prank for the new guy. Then I read the first line. Do not shine your flashlight onto open water after 11:11 p.m. Keep your light on the boardwalk planks. Never on the water. If you hear footsteps on a boardwalk behind you after midnight, do not turn around. There's no one behind you. Your radio has channels 1 through 8. If you hear your own voice speaking on 7, switch to channel 0 and sit still. There is a channel 0. Click past 8, you'll feel it. If a white egret stands on your path and does not blink by a count of 30, turn around and take another way. It is marking a boundary. Airboats leave wakes. If you see one gliding with no wake at all, kill your engine, bow your head, and count to 14. Do not look at the driver. Never step into a perfect circle of sawgrass, no matter how shallow. Circles are not grass. If you smell oranges where there are none, place 3 coins on the boardwalk and back away. Do not speak. If the mosquitoes go silent all at once, hold your breath and do not move. The old air is passing through. Lock the pump station door at 12:34 a.m. exactly. Do not open it again until you hear the first tricolored heron at dawn. Channel markers have 2 red reflectors. If you see 3, cut your engine, close your eyes, and let the boat drift backward. Do not open them until you feel the current turn. No one travels here on foot after dark. If someone asks for a ride, refuse. Do not throw a rope. Do not pull them in. If you see a panther, do not speak, do not wish, do not photograph. Leave the area without looking back. I laughed once too loud in that close room full of maps and rusted keys. Morales didn't. He had the kind of skin you only get from living in heat your whole life, leathered at the edges. The deep lines around the eyes of someone who squints across water more than across screens. He tapped the laminate with the nail of his index finger. A long, ridged nail, yellowed from nicotine and sun. They sound ridiculous, I said. They are, he said. Right up until they're the only sensible thing left. He gave me a skiff, a root, and a radio that hummed like a beehive when it sat on the metal desk. The skiff was scuffed aluminum, the kind they stopped painting because paint just peels in sheets here anyway. The kind whose dents have stories no one tells out loud. The route was a figure 8 through canals and slough where the mangroves knit overhead like ribs. Then up to a pump station, then back by way of a boardwalk that always looked new in photos and always felt soft under your boots. I shoved the rules into my shirt pocket and told myself I wouldn't look at them again. Then I patted that pocket twice at the door like a compulsion. The Everglades at night doesn't go dark, it goes deep. The light doesn't vanish. It dives under miles of moving water and lies there like a slow animal, and every thin thing left on the surface sings about it. Frogs with voices like plastic combs. Night herons yelling like old ladies. Cicadas that sound like the world's biggest power line. And over it all the mosquitoes, a high metal whine that you stop hearing until it stops, and then you can't hear anything else. My first evening out, the sky looked harmless, a peach bruise sliding purple at the edges. The heat came up from the water, not down from the sun, up from the black. I eased the skiff along the canal at idle because that is how morale said to do it when you don't yet know where the bottom has decided to be. The mangroves held still like breath held too long. At 11:10, I checked my watch without meaning to. At 11:11, I told myself the rule about the flashlight was a story. At 11:12, something big turned under the surface alongside the boat. The kind of slow roll a gator makes when it wants you to think about how much water is under you and how much of you is on top. I swung the flashlight by reflex. The beam hit the water and pinned my face there, white and flat and unfamiliar. My face looked up from the surface as if from a window. My mouth moved a fraction behind mine. I clicked the light off so fast I fumbled it, and for a moment it skittered along the bottom of the skiff, lighting the inside like a jaw. I got it back by slapping it with my palm and shutting it down so hard the rubber button squeaked. The surface went black again. That was when I heard footsteps on wood behind me. Clear, fast, coming down a boardwalk that wasn't there, hitting invisible planks in the raft of night, landing with the hollow thud only sun-dried boards make. Rule 2 said, do not turn around. I didn't. My hands went white on the tiller, and I stared ahead into the tunnel of trees, so tight that if I had lifted my arm, my knuckles would have brushed leaves. I kept my eyes on the dart of water the bow made and told myself I couldn't hear breathing behind me. I could, out of the night, wet and warm like a mouth, breathing. The footsteps came up to the back of my head and stopped there. A whisper as close as skin spoke my full name and then my mother's name, careful on the syllables like a tongue learning to make a shape. It said, I found you. I pushed the throttle because I didn't know what else to do. The skiff jumped and the mangrove slipped by like teeth. I kept my eyes forward. The breathing tilted with the boat and then thinned as if it had stood still and watched me leave. My watch ticked so hard I could feel it in the bone. When the canal opened and the channel markers arrived, I breathed without feeling like there was a price. 2 red reflectors stood on each marker, low dots like button eyes. Then 3 on the left blinked on. Rule 10, cup the engine, close your eyes, let the boat drift backward. There's nothing in a human body that likes to close eyes on water. Every part of you is a mouth screaming at you to keep them open. I shut mine anyway, killed the motor, and put both my hands on my knees so I wouldn't grab for anything else. The boat moved under me in a direction that felt wrong for what the breeze was doing. It slid backward and then sideways as if some hand under the surface had pushed it gently to the right. My eyes tried to open on their own. I turned my head down and pressed the lids with the heels of my hands until stars slid around behind them. The boat turned again and the current settled into a tug I recognized. My hands came off my eyes slow. The markers were markers, again 2 red dots each. The black water to either side had edges. When I finally got back to the marina the wrong way round, Morales was waiting with a cup that smelled like coffee and tasted like something else. You didn't turn, he said. You kept your eyes shut. I almost shined the light, I said, because I needed to say something normal. You did shine it, he said, in the voice of a man who knows when a wet shine is flashlight and when it is moon. You'll do better. How do footsteps walk on water? They don't, he said, and patted the skiff like it was a patient. It does. The next night I drew the pump station check. A concrete box with a steel door and a hum in the floor you can feel in your teeth. The canal there isn't a canal. It's a throat. The gate inside the pump station is a tongue. When it goes up, water backs up and waits and grows opinionated. When it goes down, everything that doesn't grab a root gets persuaded to leave. I locked the door at 12:34 a.m. exactly. because that S the time in the rule, and because it felt like a time someone pulled out of somewhere else and grafted onto a clock. Inside, the fluorescent light was a color I don't think exists in any sky. The radio sat on the metal desk and hissed like a snake that can't be bothered to commit. I tried to read equipment logs, and my eyes slid around like fish. On channel 2, static with shapes in it. On 3, nothing. On 4, Morales' voice asking Unit 4 about oil. On 5, traffic from a road 20 miles away. On 7, my own voice saying my full name. Hearing yourself when you aren't speaking is like finding a photograph of yourself you don't even remember posing for. I stopped breathing, then remembered the rule. Switch to 0. There is a channel 0. Click past 8. The dial didn't want to go. It clicked against nothing, my fingertips slipping on the rubber like it was oiled. Then it slid one notch past 8 and something in the radio let go. The hiss became weirdly smooth, quiet the way vacuum is quiet if you imagine. The second hand on my watch went tick, 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 loud as fingernails. Something leaned against the door like a giant shoulder. The steel flexed a little and sounded off with a hollow boom. Then a drag went down the outside as if some finger the size of a canoe had traced a line slow from top to bottom. The fluorescent light hummed harder, and I could feel it pressing in the soft place behind my eyes. Knuckle knocks came next. 1, 2, pause. 1, pause. 2 to 2. Not a rhythm I knew. Not random either. Like a door-to-door salesman in a neighborhood no one else lived in. I whispered through my teeth, no, to no one and to everything and to myself. The radio in channel 0 made no sound. I had a hand on the bowl and squeezed it to stop my hands shaking. Sweat ran down my wrist. The knocks slowed down as if it were thinking. Then they went away. I would like to say I relaxed. I would like to say nothing else happened and the tricolored heron called from the sawgrass and the rule played out neat. What happened is that the footsteps came back, not on water, on concrete. Loud, the sound of a boot on a boardwalk, only there were no boards. And the concrete wasn't hollow, and still the footsteps were the footsteps of one set of feet with a limp. They stopped right next to my left ear. I didn't turn my head, but I could tell where the sound was by how the air moved. The fluorescent light buzzed so high in my skull, it almost hurt. A woman's voice, breathless, terrified, hit the door on the other side. "Please," she said, "please help, I fell in. I don't think it can cross the creek. Please let me in." Rule 11. No one travels here on foot after dark. That's easy in daylight. In the middle of the night, it felt like telling myself to keep a screaming infant on the other side of glass. My brain put a face to the voice that had my aunt's cheekbones and a bump on the bridge of the nose like mine. I kept my hand on the bowl and did not move it. "Please," she sobbed. "Please, I hear it. It's coming." It's something big hit the door, not full body. A smack, a slam like an open palm. Dust sifted out of the light fixture. She screamed, and the sound at the end wasn't something a person does with a throat. It cut off mid-breath, and for a long time after there was nothing. The tricolored heron called at dawn, thin and far and bored. I unbolted the steel and opened the door, and the hair on both arms went up all at once. On the metal, right where my face had been most of the night, the dew had been pushed away by a handprint. Not a gator, not a person. A palm a foot long, fingers that ribboned into points like someone hammered spoons flat and filed them. I reported the pump in the book the way you do. Gate fine, filters clear, lock engaged, sunrise 6:54. I didn't write that something out there had learned my name. Gate patrols should have felt like a break. The sun makes the world honest, you think? The Everglades just makes it brighter. The water looks like mirrors, shattered and laid flat and stitched with hyacinth flowers, and soda bottles and the white knuckles of cypress knees. Egrets stuck with that stop and start dignity only birds and certain rich people have. And hangis sit with their wings out like sinners warming hands at a stove. Tourists in wide hats point and say, wow at things with dinosaur faces. It all looks like a documentary with a grant until it doesn't. Rule 4. If a white egret stands on your path and doesn't blink by 30, turn around. It is marking a boundary. I was on a boardwalk tight enough I could touch both handrails with a thumb and a pinky if I did that stretch. The egret stood ahead of me, a white thorn planted in the center of the way. I started counting. 1,000, 2, 3. At 8, I realized I could see the egret's eye, but not really. The black bead reflected everything and nothing, a perfect shine with no life behind it. I reached 20 and felt a heat in my face like embarrassment. At 30, I turned. When I came back by a longer way, someone had left coins on the board, 3 green carotid circles lined. Up at the exact spot where the egret had stood, the wood darker there, as if a wet circle had soaked in a little. I walked past with my hands jammed in my pockets because who carries cash anymore, and because part of me didn't want to know if I had 3 coins. That night, I smelled oranges. Not a faint memory, not perfumed hand soap. Oranges like you smell when you stand in a grove in bloom, white blossoms murdering the air, bitter pith under your nails from peeling, that acid sweet like sunlight has a taste. Only there are no groves here. And it was midnight in a mangrove tunnel where nothing bright grows. Rule 7 says pay. I dug in my pocket and came up with 2 quarters and a nickel, enough for parking, enough for something else. I set them on the board. I backed up without turning. When I got to 14 steps, the smell of oranges snapped off as if someone pinched the air. I stood still and waited for feeling to come back into my legs. In the morning, those 3 coins were fused to the planks under a sheen like resin. Not nail polish, not glue. Something clear that didn't flash in the sun and didn't turn sticky under my finger. The wood around them was darker and bled up the edges of the coins a little like bruise. I asked Morels what I had paid for. "Elaine," he said, "1 for you. Maybe 1 for somebody else behind you. Toll's gone up since I started. What happens if you don't pay?" He looked at the water. "You don't see anyone again who didn't pay. There are things you pretend not to notice when you want to keep a job." An airboat with no wake came around a bend where mangroves brush your shoulders because there's nowhere else to put them. The fan should have shaken the world. The water under the hull lay flat like black glass. The bow didn't push a wall and the stern didn't pull a bruise. Rule 5 said kill my engine and bow my head and count to 14 and do not look at the driver. I dropped my chin and the skiff nodded as if in prayer. I counted. 1, 2, 3. The airboat slid past my peripheral like a shadow that had been trained to be polite. At 7, the smell hit me. Not oranges. Old skin, not rot preserved. Dry as a snake that shed in a barn and got left there for a summer, sweet like warm plastic. At 11, curiosity gnawed. I didn't look full on. My eyes cheated. I saw cuffs over a ranger green shirt and gloves on hands, but the wrists between glove and cuff were water. Just water, vibrating a little with the fan. The profile above the wheel was a human-shaped nothing, a notch for a mouth, a suggestion of a brow. My eyes skittered off it like minnows. When I started my engine again, the radio clicked by itself. Channel 7. My voice came through laughing, the laugh I use when someone told an ugly joke at a family Christmas, and I needed them to feel like they were still welcome. I clicked past 8 with my thumb until the dial fell into channel 0, and then there was no laughter anywhere in the world. The old air is a pressure you don't know your body can make. It happened 2 weeks in. 1 second, mosquitoes everywhere, the wine like silver thread. The next, silence so clean it rubbed the skin off sound. Rule 8 says hold your breath and don't move. I did. Immediately. My lungs screamed at me and my hands didn't know where to go. Something moved under the skiff, not fish, not gator. Not anything that swims, a turn. The way a whole room turns the first time you stand up too fast after giving blood. The skiff listed toward it and then back. The water on the surface pimpled and flattened as if a breath went through it. Cold pushed into my teeth and pressed them like fingers. Behind my eyes, a sine wave rolled from back to front. The world waited. When it passed, air came back in a lump. Frogs started, night birds started. The mosquito wine rose from nothing into everything. On my forearm, 3 tiny glittering flakes lay like confetti, mosquito wings. Just the wings. I wiped them into the water and told myself not to tell anyone about that. A tourist showed me a photo the next morning, sheety taken from a pull-off in an expensive rental with a well-scratched hood. A panther in the lens, big as the stories, that long tail like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Behind it in shallow water, a white egret stood. It was slightly out of focus. Its eye was not. I made a rule for myself, no laminate carries. If you ever see the panther and the egret share a frame, leave the county. 3 weeks in, I broke Rule 11. I only broke it because the woman in the water used my name the way my mother does when she's tired of leaving voicemails. She stood waist deep in a side channel where mangroves make a shape like knuckles just under the surface. She had hair stuck to both cheeks in 2 thin diagonals, like she cried and rubbed saltless tears outward. She kept her hands out of the water like someone told her not to feed whatever lives under there. Her teeth chattered. The skin at the top of her shoulders was chicken flesh. Her lips were so blue they looked like paint. "Please," she said. "Boat died. I can't feel my legs anymore. It's heavy." "It's so heavy." Her gaze darted to my gunnels and back. "Please. My brain knows no one travels here at night on foot. My bones know if you leave someone in water like that, you don't get to sleep again." I eased the skiff close with the pole, keeping the bow between us, thinking, if there's weight on the other side, it hits aluminum first, not me. "Take my hand," I said. I don't know why I made it a question. Her right hand touched mine, cold like metal left in shade. Human. The callus on her palm, exactly where a rope burns you if you're careless. A nick on the ring finger healing in a dark crescent, real. Her left hand came up. It wasn't. It was clean and long with fingers that went too far before the knuckles came. It placed itself on the rail with delicacy, as if what it belonged to only ever touched things that didn't belong to it. I saw my own face reflected in the wet of it, 8 eyes and 8 beads of water. The rail under it made a sound like a fork dragged across a plate. I shoved the tiller and the bow twitched 2 inches. Enough to make the hand miss. It sank without a splash. The woman screamed in a sound that broke like a rope and went under so fast the surface was flat again before I thought to throw a float. I threw one anyway and it sank like a memory. When I looked at the aluminum later, 4 long gouges ran along the gunnel. Not scratches. Gouges soft at the edges as if they'd been melted. In the morning, the edges had rounded more, not with oxidation. With time, the metal smoothed itself as if it could heal. I didn't tell morals for 2 days and then did because the not telling felt like lying to someone I had to share a night with. He looked at the rail. ran his thumb along the softened cuts, and nodded like a doctor who has no bedside manner and no time for yours. He came back from his truck with the second laminate. Same rules. Each line had a hole punched through the margin. 12 holes, small, clean, like the card had been used for a game of counting. Pray your way through, he said. You don't believe in anything, you will or you won't last. Pray to what? Lane keepers, he said. Things that make corridors where the living can go without being noticed. The fewer there are, the more you're gonna notice the other things. The storm on the radar drew itself like a child's swirl. The outer bands came first, pulling the lake up into the trees, making islands out of dirt that had long thought they were land. When water rises here, what lives under it rises too. We locked the gates different in weather like that. The pump stations became throats and the canals became tongues, and we held the city back with concrete and text that said things like, "Down to take I-75 east." Morales sent us in pairs that night. I drew Ranger Day, small and long-armed, hair in a braid down her back that looked heavy enough to anchor a boat. We locked the pump station door at 12:34. The radio laughed on 7 with my voice. When I clicked it to 0, the laugh came again behind us on the concrete. Footsteps crossed the floor, not echoing right, like they were walking away and toward us at the same time. An airboat passed outside with no wake, and the wall between us, and it breathed in like a lung. Day took the second laminate out of her chest pocket and set it on the desk between us. The holes down the edge lined up with the words. She slid a paper clip from one hole to the next with a fingernail and said each rule like a bead. Don't shine. Don't turn. Channel 0. Marker bird. Bow your head. Don't step in circles. Pay your toll. Hold your breath. Lock at 12:34. 2 reflectors, not 3. No riders. Leave the cat alone. When she got to the end, she started again. Don't shine. Something heavy scraped along the roof slow, as if a hand outside had run along the concrete, feeling for a place to rip. The light hummed so bright the air hurt. The smell of oranges rolled under the door and took on a bitter curl halfway through, like someone had burned a peel. Do we pay it? I said. We don't have a board in here. You pay it with not going out, she said. If it can't find us, maybe it goes back to whatever lane it fell out of. A knock. Not frantic. Not begging. Polite. Then 3 more, spaced exactly like a heartbeat. Day's eyes cut to mine. We counted with them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. A tricolored heron called somewhere too close to be outside, then another too fast after it. A recording looked wrong. Don't you dare, Day said, and put both palms on the desk to keep them from deciding on their own. The knocks turned timid. 4, pause, 4, pause, 4. When it came, the real Huron was thin and hesitant, the sound of a bird that had barely slept and had no idea what it was calling into. We opened the door at dawn with our bodies angled like we expected something to hit. The pump station roof had new marks, like someone dragged the point of a pick in lines parallel one to the next. Out on the platform, the grating had a circle of wet on it shaped like a perfect sawgrass ring, even though there was no grass anywhere near it. We left coins on the grating anyway. That is not in any manual. Days stacked on days. Nights turned into a pattern like a prayer anyone can say whether they believe or not. I slept in chapters, 2 pages at a time. I learned where the egrets stand and do not blink, and where the rings open and breathe, and that if you look too long, you find yourself looking down a pupil that makes you remember when everything was water and it never asked you to go to work. A trainee came in late July, Chris, 24 at most. A patchy beard trying to become an identity. Hands that looked like he'd never lifted anything heavier than a camera bag. He had the stubborn round eyes of someone who thinks rules are for other people or for the old ones who write them, not for him. He watched me fold the laminate into my pocket like you put an icon in your shirt and smiled a little like he didn't. To know yet which jokes get told here and which don't, I tried to save him from himself by boring him. I took him to the soft boards where tourists ask if this is where they shot that one scene in that one show. I pointed at things until his eyes glazed. I talked about snails, about how you can tell one anhinga from another by the pattern of feathers if you care enough. I didn't show him the pump station until the fourth day. He took a picture of the door and then another from closer. He laughed at the dent like someone had tried to kick their way out. Rules devolve into suggestions first, then into nothing. He shined a light on open water because he dropped a pen and wanted to see if it would float. His face came up from the surface and played catch-up with his mouth. He made a noise like a laugh and a cough and spun the light off like he decaught himself doing something you only do when you re-drunk. I watched his shake afterward, that little tremor you can pretend is the boat until there's no boat under your feet and you can still feel it. You don't joke with it, I said, and hated how I sounded like Morales. I'm not joking, he said, and then did with his mouth anyway because he couldn't help the habit. I smelt oranges on the boardwalk before he did. I dropped coins like a reflex. He patted pockets and came up empty. It's a digital world. We don't pay for anything with metal. He looked at me from behind my shoulder with the face of someone who wants to ask for money but doesn't. Do you know how to make it not sound like theft? I handed him 3 pennies from 5 years ago, green with sweat and pocket lint. He set them down awkward and backwards, and then looked down like maybe he deplaced them in the wrong order, like there was an order for 3 identical pennies. We backed away. The smell went sweet-sour and off like juice left in a hot car. He asked about the coins after. The lane keepers, the toll. He laughed when he shouldn't have and put his hand to his throat like maybe he hadn't meant to. After a few nights, he stopped saying so and started watching the water the way you watch a neighborhood dog you're done. Know if it bites. The day the storm broke things open, he disobeyed Rule 11 in the way most of us do if we last long enough to have opinions. He didn't do it for love of humanity. He did it because someone used his name in his ear the way a mother does when she is angry and he was tired enough to want to fix something small that had the shape of a big thing he couldn't fix. I was a mile off. The radio said his call sign in a voice that wasn't dispatch and then went dead. By the time I got there, the skiff was listing and the gouges down the gunnel looked fresh and soft like lips. The surface was unhelpful. He stood upright in the water 50 feet from the boat like a photograph cut out and pasted wrong. He looked at me with eyes that didn't match his face. You didn't throw me a rope, he said, in a voice like mine on Channel 7. Careful with my name, careful with my mother's. I backed away slow and kept the skiff between us. He took 2 short steps and didn't sink, and the water around his waist didn't ripple. The smell swung through, bright as blossoms. The world felt like paying overdue bills. Please, he said, as if practicing. I left. I am sorry about believing. I am not sorry I am still here. No one talks about him now. Not because we agreed to be quiet. because the boardwalk has places in it where the planks are newer. And if you step on them, they give in a way that says someone might be under there, or was, or is whenever you shine a light. A white alligator took up residence near Shark River for 3 weeks like a saint, drawing tourists like a church fair. Not albino, something else. Something that bleached things pale, even the pole we used to check depth. People said it was a sign of what nobody knew. Morel said it was someone's old wish that got stuck in the wrong section of water. You can live this way for a while. You can make prayers out of cardinal directions and mosquitoes, and the way the mangroves braid and unbraid in your sleep. You can count to 14 3 times a night and still have fingers left to do your job. You can hold your breath when the world stops singing and not die. You cannot turn. You cannot open the door. You cannot speak to the cat. The rules make a shape you can live inside for a season or two, a house with walls of all the don'ts you can remember. Then something knocks that doesn't know the rules. It doesn't want in. It wants you to write more rules on the card and punch more holes. It came late after the storm flayed the lake and the gates opened to let the city exhale. The water went down faster than I thought was possible without leaving fish steaming on mud. The mosquitoes didn't. They followed the water line down like a curtain. At noon, the wine stopped. Daylight. Egrets everywhere doing 1,000 blinks a minute. Heat that made metal too hot to touch. And silence. A noon silence that baked my ears like clay. I stopped moving, not because of a rule. Because my muscles forgot the instructions. Air pushed against my teeth again, and this time it had heat in it. The world in front of me bent like a spoon and flattened and bent again. Something rolled under the skiff and kept rolling. A slow turn, like a wheel you can never see all of. It turned under the boardwalk too. The planks lifted and set in a slowness that put splinters in the word slowness. A smell came with it. Not oranges. Something like dust from book pages that fell in flood water and were pulled out and dried in sunlight and still remember silt. The smell went into my mouth and sat there in the cavity under the tongue where you keep curses. Off to my left of the edge of a ring. I had never seen blink by day. A panther stood up out of nowhere, shook like a dog shakes ocean out of its ears, and stared at me like I had a decision to make that would matter to it later. Behind it, in the water, a white egret stood and did not blink. I left. I left so fast the skiff came up on plane and slapped down and the gauges jittered. That night, I took the second laminate, the one with the holes, and punched a 13th in the empty corner with my pocket knife. I wrote a new rule on the back in pencil where sweat would take it sooner or later. If the mosquitoes go silent in daylight, there's no rule. Get inside the strongest concrete box you can find. Pray your way through all 12 holes twice. I stopped telling my family where I was. My mother called and used my name, and I let the voicemail take it. It sat there, vibrating on the laminate counter of a rented kitchen that smelled like bleach and fry oil from the unit next door. I listened to her later when the world was loud enough to make a human voice feel safe. She said I sounded tired. She said I needed to get some sun. She said that if I needed to come home, I could always come home. The swamp began putting faces on things I didn't believe had faces. The rings blinked if you watched from the corner of your eye. The markers arranged themselves to tell you numbers that meant dates. The number 3 started appearing where it shouldn't. 3 reflectors, 3 coins, 3 knocks, 3 howls one night from 3 corners of a sky that did not have corners, timed like signals. Morales, aged 10 years and a week. He stood in front of a map and drew a line with a dry erase marker, and it squeaked and made a sound exactly like the footsteps on the boardwalk, and we all turned to face a door that wasn't there. He put the cap on the marker with fingers that had grease ingrained in the whirl lines and said, "You make lanes. The water, it doesn't like lanes. It tolerates. You widen a lane too far and something else uses it. What else?" Day asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at all of us one at a time like he was counting teeth, and we were all the mouth of something hungry. What I'm saying is the rules only get you so far. Then something old presses its weight against the door, and the laminate flexes, and a hole opens up beside your punched holes, and something looks through, and the advice ends. You're not a hero. You're a person with a list and a boat. The last night began ordinary in the way horrible things begin. I checked the oil. I counted flares. I shook out a life vest, and 2 wolf spiders fell out, a pair, as if I'd woken them in a bed. A tourist asked me if the snakes are real and then asked me again after I said yes. The air felt like soup, and the clouds stacked over the flat like the city had built new towers beyond the line of sight. I made the pump station at 12:31 because I wanted to lock it early and felt superstitious about that thought. I stood in front of the steel with a key in my hand and looked at the second-hand marching on my watch like a tiny man making it up a steep hill. At 12:34, I turned the key. I slid the bolt. I sat inside and put the radio on the desk like a live animal in a cage. Channel 7 stayed quiet. The footsteps didn't come. The roof didn't breathe. I started to think the worst thing that would happen would be me sitting until dawn, with sweat collecting behind my knees and the fluorescent tube feeling like a migraine. My own voice said my name. Not through the radio, not from outside. From the drain in the floor. My own voice, pitched wrong by concrete and holes and water moving under the world, said my name and then my mother's. It said, "Open the door." I clicked the radio to 0 and then away, and then back because suddenly I didn't know which one to believe. I tried to remember if the first rule said anything about drains. It doesn't. There's no rule for drains. I told myself I could go the rest of my life without ever stepping barefoot in a shower. The drain gurgled like a laugh. Then it said my name the way my mother says it when she is delighted, and it said, "I am outside." And with that, a knock came on the steel. 4, a heartbeat. 4, a heartbeat. As if someone had set their forehead against the door and tapped it with an instrument connected by a tube to a heart. The smell of oranges rolled in hot. It wasn't blossoms. It was peel scorched black on a stovetop coil. The Huron called, "Wrong, wrong." This is when rules end. This is when stories would say I became brave or crazy. I didn't either. I became very practical. I took out 3 coins and set them on the floor and backed up without turning and said nothing. The smell dropped out of the air like it got trapped under a lid. The heartbeat knock changed tempo, curious for a few bars, then impatient, then furious. It hit the door once hard and stopped as if it had just remembered something important it needed to do elsewhere. I waited for the ceiling to come down. It didn't. I waited for footsteps. None. The fluorescent tube hummed in the key of my headache. My vision tunneled until the laminate on the desk was a little island and everything else was fog. The first thin, exhausted Huron called at dawn. I unlocked the door and stepped out into light so clean, it felt like my pupils cracked. The platform around the pump station had puddles, the size of footprints, too long for a person and too narrow for a gator and too honest to be a joke. The grating held a damp circle 12 feet wide. There were coins in it, not mine, pressed edge on into the metal like seeds you line up in a paper towel to sprout and then forget. I pulled the gate lever and the water fell by inch and foot, and the canal below revealed itself like a stomach. Things turned. Some were fish. Some weren't. Out at the edge of the hyacinth, a ring lifted and blinked in the sun and went down. Farther out, 3 channel markers lined up for a second and made 6 red eyes. I closed my eyes and let the boat drift backward and felt an old current set against my shin bones like a cat saying you are in my way. When I opened my eyes, Day was there in her skiff 30 yards off. Her braid wet up the back like a tail from where a wave had chosen her. She lifted the second laminate in 2 fingers like a cigarette, and for a moment the holes glowed because the sun had found a way to come through in 12 neat coins of light. "You alive?" She said, "I think so." She looked over my shoulder at the pump station door. "Don't open the door," she said, and smiled the smile you use when you know you are repeating the refrain to a song you sing because it keeps you steady, not because it keeps the thing away. The last thing I did before noon was write 2 more rules on the back of the card with graphite that would sweat off by September. When your radio calls you by the name your mother uses, drop it in the water and get another. If the panther looks at you and the bird behind it doesn't blink, leave the county. I didn't leave, not yet. I don't pretend there was nobility in staying. It was work, and the work felt like a way to keep a city from getting what it asks for every time it widens a canal and tells a river how to behave. Lane keepers make corridors. If there aren't enough human lane keepers, the old ones put the lanes where they want, and those lanes go places that don't have zip codes. Morales told me something that he would deny, he said. He said once there were women who sat in chairs beside pump station doors with coins in their pockets, and they paid all night. Old women, sisters, aunties, people who took a debt from the rest of us onto themselves and made sure none of us had to open the door. He said he had known 2, and they died within a week of each other in different counties, and the water rose 5 inches higher than it should have that year with the same rain. He didn't ask me to sit the chair. He knew what asking means. By August, the laminate had softened to a cloth you could fold into air. The holes went dark at the edges where my thumb had worried them. The first hole had a ridge around it where I had pressed too hard too often. The 13th looked hasty and mean, like someone had stabbed the card and then regretted it. The city did what cities do. It planned a new lane. It wanted the water to go someplace neat and straight and not past a neighborhood full of new money and houses on stilts named after fish that done life here. On a Wednesday with clouds like buildings, the order came down that the gate would open early and close late, and if anything got in the way of that schedule, the problem would be solved by moving the problem. Morale stood in the pump station doorway and squinted up at rain that hadn't yet come and said, "We will keep it from coming in the door. If it wants in some other way, then we're out of rules." Day set 3 coins on the grating without being asked. I added 3 more and pretended I didn't see that the grating had made a pattern under our coins that looked like a map if you knew what you were looking at. We held the door at 12:34. We paid into noon. We counted into night. We listened to wolves howling in a park that doesn't have wolves, and we didn't. To argue about taxonomy because something in us understood there are howls that move water, whether or not their owners have been reintroduced. When it happened, it didn't look like anything. It felt like everything that had ever wanted inside took a breath at once. The steel door leaned as if weight had come to bear so gently there was no sound, and all the air simply decided not to be where we were. The coins on the grating sang a single thin note that I only heard in my teeth. The mosquitoes stopped. The birds forgot their names. The airboat outside made no wake. The footsteps walked down the drain and up the wall and across the ceiling. My radio said my full name and my mother's, and then said, "Open," and the voice of my father, which is a neat trick because he has been dead 6 years. I clicked the dial to 0 and then crushed it between both palms and then dropped it because it was suddenly hot. It thumped against the concrete and fell on its back and stared up at me like a turtle. I didn't open the door. We waited so long the Huron call at dawn felt like a lie. When the sun came up, the city cranes pointed at it like they'd invented it. The canal below dropped like a throat swallowing. The door had a new dent. My laminate had a crease where I had folded it around a corner and squeezed. I am not going to tell you I won anything. I am not going to tell you the old air respectless, or that it will leave you alone if you learn its names. I am telling you that rules make a narrow place you can sometimes fit through. I am telling you if you are going to ask me for a ride after dark, you will not like my answer. Last week, a kid with a drone caught 3 seconds of something blinking where nothing should blink. It went up and went down in the same blink, and the comments filled with words like reflection and fake. Morels printed the frame and taped it. Inside the pump station door, as if to make the door itself remember something the rest of us failed to. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The door knows the knock. I don't sleep much. I dream of sawgrass circles the size of highways. I wake with the taste of oranges in my mouth and the feeling that I owe someone change. I have learned to count to 14 at the pace my heart uses when it is frightened and not shoot ahead. I have learned the difference between the Huron that calls because it is morning and the one that calls because something has learned to press a button. When my mother calls, I sit with the phone in my pocket until the world is loud enough to make a human voice seem like the most reasonable thing in it. I talk to her about sunscreen and snakes and how you can tell one anhinga from another by feather pattern if you want to. I do not tell her that sometimes at the edge of the hyacinth, a shape stands up with no weight attached and asks me for a ride. Sometimes people ask what the Everglades is. I used to say river of grass, the phrase you put on postcards. Now I say it as a place where the world is still the world and under it is the other thing. And the rules are the wooden rails you grip so you don't fall down the stairs between them. I have no ending for you. I have a list. I have a door. I have hands that know where the bolt is, even in my sleep. If you ever find yourself on a boardwalk here at night, and the footsteps come up behind you and you want to turn because it will kill you not to know, don't. If you smell oranges and you have no coins, take off a ring if you have one and use that, because it cares about metal in the shape of death, not the face stamped on it. If the mosquitoes stop at noon, get under concrete and remember the order of the holes. If your radio says your name the way your mother says it is not your mother. Switch to channel 0 and sit still. Count to 14. Count again. Pray your way through. And whatever knocks, no matter how polite the rhythm, no matter how closely it matches your heart, don't be the one who opens the door.